All right, today we're diving into a geopolitical crisis that almost shattered the world's most powerful military alliance. But here's the twist. The threat wasn't from some outside enemy, it came from deep within. So picture this. It's January 2026. European military forces, we're talking elite soldiers trained for the harshest Arctic warfare, are landing on the icy shores of Greenland.
But they're not there to fight Russia or China, the usual suspects you'd expect to see making moves in the high north.
Nope! Get this. They're there because of threats from their biggest, oldest, and most powerful ally, the United States. This is the incredible story of how NATO was pushed right to the very edge of collapse by one of its own.
This whole deployment was called Operation Arctic Endurance. And let me tell you, this was way more than just a military exercise. This was a line in the sand, a moment that we have literally never seen before in modern history. And just look at who was involved. I mean, the list is staggering. Denmark was leading the charge, obviously, but you've got the UK, Germany, France, the Nordics, basically a united front of European powers. And they were all there to defend the sovereignty of one NATO member from the aggression of another. That's just wild. This wasn't for show. This was a genuine wall of defiance.
So the big question is, how on earth did it get to this point? Well, it all goes back to a long-running obsession of President Donald Trump, an idea that started out as, an absurd discussion and then morphed into what he called an absolute necessity.
Okay, to really get why this was such a big deal, you need a little bit of history. Greenland's connection to Denmark isn't new. It goes back centuries, like over 1,000 years. And you can see how that relationship evolved from a colony to a place with home rule, and now it's recognized as a people with the right to self-determination. So the bottom line is this. Greenland is not just some piece of real estate up for grabs. It's a nation with a right to choose its own path. So after the 2024 re-election, this whole idea just kicks into high gear. It's not a quirky real estate proposal anymore. The framing completely changes. Listen to this quote. "The ownership and control of Greenland is an absolute necessity." He's framing it as a national security issue. That's a much, much more aggressive tone. And what came next is what a lot of analysts started calling a hybrid war. That's basically a campaign of pressure and infiltration. You're trying to get what you want without, actually starting a shooting war. You use political pressure, social pressure, all that stuff. And reports from Danish media laid out this alleged three-phase plan. Step 1, a charm offensive. Try to win over the people in Greenland. Step 2, direct pressure. Squeeze the Danish government. And then Step 3, societal infiltration. Basically, try to create chaos and drive a wedge between Greenland and Denmark. So what does it actually look like on the ground? Well, here are a couple of pretty glaring examples. You have Donald Trump Jr. making a supposedly private visit where his team was reportedly handing out MAGA hats to locals. Then you have VP J.D. Vance just showing up uninvited at a U.S. base in Greenland to give a speech about how Denmark had failed the Greenlanders. I mean, come on. These were not subtle moves. They were designed to provoke. And the language coming out of the White House just got more and more aggressive. It peaked in January 2026 when a top aide, Stephen Miller, just came right out and said it. The U.S. has the right to take Greenland. That's a jaw-dropping statement. It completely ignores international law and the fact that Denmark is supposed to be an ally. Okay, so you'd think with all that pressure, they'd just cave, right? Wrong. This whole campaign was met with a massive pushback. Greenland, Denmark, and their European allies started building what I can only describe as a wall of defiance. The reaction from the public was just huge, and it was immediate. You had massive hands-off Greenland protests popping up everywhere, filling the streets in Copenhagen and in Nuuk. And these slogans, "Greenland is not for sale" and "Make America Go Away," they became these powerful symbols of defiance. Now, here's something really interesting. Back in the States, the American public was not on board with this at all. A poll from that time shows that an overwhelming 73% of Americans were against an invasion. Only 8% supported it. So this was absolutely not some popular policy that had the backing of the people. And it wasn't just the public. In Congress, the opposition was strong, and it was bipartisan. You had senior Republicans like Mike Johnson and Mitch McConnell calling the threats completely inappropriate and a catastrophic act of strategic self-harm. They even got together with Democrats to introduce a bill, the NATO Unity Protection Act, specifically to stop it from happening. So let's zoom out for a second. This was way bigger than just a fight between the US and Denmark. The The fallout from this threatened to rip apart the entire Western security alliance. We're talking about NATO on the brink. So how did the administration respond to Europe sending troops? By threatening a trade war. That's right, tariffs of up to 25% on the very allies who are participating in Operation Arctic Endurance. They were directly linking economic punishment to their demands for territory. And this whole situation, it goes right to the absolute core of what NATO is. Article 5. That's the promise, the bedrock principle, that an attack on one member is an attack on all of them. And the incredible irony here is that the only time Article 5 has ever been used in history was to help the United States after 9/11.
But this crisis brought up a question that, honestly, the founders of NATO probably never even thought to ask. What happens when the attacker is an ally? What do you do when the biggest threat is coming from the most powerful member of your own team? There's nothing in the rulebook for that.
So you can imagine the long-term damage here was just immense. It really forced the alliance to look inward and face a kind of threat it was never, ever built to handle, a crisis from within. The alliance's whole future was suddenly uncertain.
The whole thing was just so self-destructive. The political analyst David Ignatius put it perfectly. He said it was like shooting yourself in the head. I mean, it risked throwing away decades of carefully built American security policy for what exactly? And you have to ask, who really benefits from all of this chaos? Well, as the Wall Street Journal pointed out, it was a massive gift to America's adversaries. His actions were literally achieving the fondest dream of Russian strategy, which has always been to divide Western Europe from the US and break the NATO alliance. Now, the crisis did eventually cool down, but it left a really deep scar. It forced America's closest allies to seriously question if they could rely on its promises. And it leaves us all with this really unsettling question. Can the world's most powerful alliance, an alliance built to stop any outside threat, actually survive a total breakdown of trust from within?